Can I ask the three speakers to please take a seat on the stage? Yeah? So who has the first question here? Which one? Yes. Could you please stand up?
Saskia Kampert. My question is, when I hear the things you speak about, it's so beautiful. One forgets himself. We are friends. Things are so good, and so that's what we are trying to do, and that is what Mrs. Blavatsky told us to do. But when I read her life, I see only problems. She has everywhere enemies. She's sick. She has problems with money. She has, you know what I mean. She encounters everywhere problems. And then I think, is this the way it is? Do you have, if you follow her path, will your life be only full of problems and without money, or will you be working on a happy life? It's an egoistic question, perhaps, but it's
a valid one. Yes, very good. Thank you. All right, who would like to give an answer to this one?
I think if we take a look just on our own life, it's not so different. I mean, it's pure reality in front of us. Otherwise, we would not be there trying to change the world. So it means that at this stage of development of our evolution, as we know, we are still developing one layer when all the other lower layers are very present and are taking a big stake in our life. So I think it's just a reality as it is. And the other thing I would add, and that is also something everyone can experience, you make progress when you are in difficulty.
Yeah. In The Hague we say, zonder wrijving geen glans. Maybe Jan can practice that later. But it means without friction, you don't have a shining surface. So, and I think that, as was also, I think, demonstrated yesterday in her letters, that actually through this bitterness, something really shines out. You know, there is this essence there, and you just feel it. So, so I think it's just a way of looking at the matter. Yeah.
I would. I like the last part. It's just a way of looking at it because it's all a perspective. It's a problem if you say it's a problem. It's an opportunity if you say it's an opportunity. The old expression, woe to those, I think she said, that don't suffer. But the suffering is mainly necessary as suffering to change the mind. If the mind is changed, it's not suffering. It's process. And that process simply comes to be understood as nutrition in terms of opening up awareness. The perception of events that look terrible is learning. And then I always like to ask myself, when I'm eating, I do eat. When the food is in my stomach and the acid is pouring out and the cells that I have devoured are in pain and agony as it is burning through their cellulose and everything else, is it bad? Or is it part of the process? Because without that, this wouldn't be. And so now I have a duty to those that sacrifice even in my little self to do that the best way I can from an emotional perspective, from an eating perspective, from minimizing intake, things like that, and yet trying to maintain harmony. So we live in a world of unbalance or imbalance, and we do the best we can. And process occurs, how we label process, again, perspective, is an individual issue.
So of course, it doesn't take away that the suffering is real.
Is it?
Yeah, well, for the person going through it. So, and that's I think what we should never forget. That's also part of us, always. So, I think, and that's also the other part of the message, that we should always be compassionate, and because it's happening also this. And it's very real. I don't have to explain for all of us.
Debate.
But
Yes?
we just may
We're gonna
want
argue.
to say that there is pain
Yes.
and suffering, which are two different things. Pain is just, I would say, the original phenomenon, like in your stomach. And suffering is someone needs to be there to say, I am suffering. That's where the problem is created. The ego, most of the time, think he is suffering. And when the ego is no more there is no more suffering. There is still pain, but there is no more suffering.
Okay, so with that, if, and again, these are words from the teachings, secret doctrine, etc., if the sense and instrument of ego being deluded believes it's suffering, yes, we will be compassionate. We have to. Again, that's, you're not going to say that's your karma. But is it the truth? And so part of the teaching is, we think, to bring us gradually to that truth. So the question would be for one that believes they're suffering, and Lord knows I had a year. But the question would be, how do we look at the experience impersonally to gain in understanding? Because we can suffer and we will feel bad, and others will help us. But at the end of that suffering, we still have to ask if we are reflective. And I think that was the word that was used the other day. What have we learned? Where have we come to understand?
Then one word. Poor Mrs. Blavatsky. She was an avatar. She was, you can call her whatever you want. And when I read her letters, the poor lady is suffering also. So even she must suffer. That's then the conclusion. Do I understand it? Right? Yeah? Okay.
Sorry to say, but I have to support Gino.
Could you stand up, please?
Now, okay. I think there is a misconception in quite often how we see life. I try to give a simple example. If my car broke down, I can be in a tremendous problem, but I create a problem on the moment, because on the moment I'm buying a car, I know that it will fail once, because it is a human product, so it is not perfect. So we need to learn how to cope with it. And I think it is a very important thing to realize, from a theosophical point of view, that you can grow and can learn without going through suffering. Because otherwise it means that you say to yourself, search as much as possible suffering, and then I will learn fast. But that is not true. Yeah? So you have to realize that exactly what Jean said, if you start to identify yourself with a problem and you don't see it as a challenge to solve something, yes, then you have suffering. But if you say, okay, it happens, it's a karmic effect, I have to do something, do something. Simple as that, I think. And of course, if you look to the life of Blavatsky, that's what I mean, yeah? If you look to the life of Blavatsky, and if I look to the life of many other people, oh yes, I see a lot of suffering, yeah? But I have to realize that in a certain way, it is their way of coping with the problem. We have a very good example recently. A lady, a good member of our society, was identified to have cancer in a far state. So the doctors say, okay, when do we start with? She say, no, we don't start. First we do a scan. And we did a scan, and then he found it was all over, and he say, well, shall we make an appointment for doing a treatment? He say, no, we don't do a treatment. because I am not interested into extending this situation with another couple of months. So give me something what makes my life the last month available, so I can live the being I am. And she did exactly that way. And I must say, she did great. Yeah.
In the back, Helena.
HPB says that psychology would get a run for its money. So, from a theosophical perspective, how does psychology now get a run for its money?
Is the question clear?
Oh, yeah.
So could you help us just a little bit for the rest of us? What do you mean by giving it a run for its money?
Pressure. It's going to have a tremendous amount of pressure on it in this cycle. She says chemistry and psychology. We're going to have an especially hard time, a lot of pressure. What was the pressure? And from a theosophical perspective, what is the pressure on psychology?
The only thing which comes to my mind is that at this time psychology was not really developed as we know it now. And so it was really starting from some hypotheses, some fundamental which were and are maybe still very far from what we know of the constitution of man. Therefore, it could not really explain most of the behavior of man, except of course, the external one.
But they're still not able to do so.
No, I agree that they make some progress, but again, because the bases are not there in this science, it cannot go there.
I think, I'm sorry to say, but if you look what they do nowadays, it is more behavioralism than having a good understanding of the spiritual side of the being and the personalities and so on. Yeah. So I don't know how it is in other countries, but in this country it is just behavioralism. And what they do, they give you medicine to come into another behavior, but they don't solve the problem. Because solving the problem, you need Theosophy. Yeah, you have to understand. No, you have to understand what life is. You have to understand where you stand. You have to understand what karma is and what you have to do to solve the problems. But they don't tell you how to solve the problems. I don't want to speak for Gene, of course, but he's in a very privileged condition because he knows much more than his colleagues. Yeah.
But I think you see it in daily life reflected what she says. I mean, I'm not very good at figures. Probably you know how many people are in antidepressant on antidepressant drugs. I think it's huge. I think in the Netherlands only more than 1 million of really small countries. So that's one in 20, 1 in 16 even. So. And the whole problem is that it's purely a physical, mechanical way of trying to cope a problem that is on a mental level. So, and as long as that isn't recognized, I think, we still have to cope longer with that problem.
We can. I was just going to say that there are some pioneers. Even some in the transpersonal camps that look at the being as a being of principle. And so when we're working, yes, there is the behavioral aspect because there are certain instincts and habits in the body that the mind cannot reach in its typical cognitive state. And especially when you're dealing with public who believes beyond a shadow of a doubt that they exist, and who believe that they suffer. I mean, think of this for a moment. When the electricity goes out and the computers don't work and the internet doesn't work and you can't get your money from the bank, are you going to suffer? Most folks will suffer. Why? Because of an unnecessary problem that they committed. They bought the car, knowing that the car was going to break down, latched their mind to it, became attached to it as an extra appendage of themselves. And so when the computer doesn't break, they get mad. When it breaks, they get mad. They get upset. They say they have stress. Does it really exist, or is it simply the way that they're reacting to an opportunity or a problem? But if they're not seeing it that way, then you've got to deal where they are. Part of that is with the emotional side. Then part of that is with the cognitive side. And so if we wanted to say lower manas, with expectations, not having clarified and purified emotions, gets all together to look at an external problem, then it's out of whack. And yes, most docs want to give a pill, because the pill will shut down the system and people will feel calm, and then they can go about doing still what got them in trouble in the first place. But if you're dealing with an individual, and I have to speak as a doctor now, because you've got to be careful, because if you're saying, hey, I know that this is a karmic problem, and I know that it's a spiritual issue, and really what you have to do is alter your manas. They don't know what that is. They don't know how to get in touch with it. Most of the time, our manas is so full of crud that you don't want to open the door anyway. Yeah, really. I mean, how do people talk about the unconscious? Most of the unconscious is looked at from the point of view of shadow and stuffing and storing. And when you've got a whole bunch of food in the closet that you haven't looked at for 6 months, it stinks, it's rotted, and that's what we are. And so to get through that and talk about that from a spiritual perspective, you will get sued. So unfortunately, if your client trusts you, you can address different levels, and you can use a little of this and a little of that and make your potpourri, your stew. And if they're ready, they will grab onto this piece as well as that piece, and they'll find that their life is changing. And that's a gradual process. But again, some just don't want that gradual process. And if you don't give them something, they'll go out and get something, as we were talking about this morning with the drugs, the alcohol, etc., to calm the system down, forgetting that the system is an extension of themselves from within without.
So perhaps, Helena, there's still a lot of molds of mind that need to be broken down in these areas, and Theosophy can offer some solutions there. Yes, over here, David.
One little comment on this.
You get a mic.
Actually, I think HPV also said, she said that the psychologists are going to have a lot of work on their hands in the 20th century. And I think that really has to, you know, she saw the cycle coming, I think. We live in very intense times. There's all these ideas out there, all these pressures on us. And, you know, there's a lot of psychic maladies out there, and the psychologists are the ones that are tinkering with them, you know. So, but on behalf of psychology, I think there's been a lot of headway in the psychological field. They're not all behavioralists anymore by any means. Transactional psychology, there's Buddhist psychologists, there's psychologists that are totally theosophical, some that I've read. One man in the United States who was actually very close to a very prominent theosophist was A.H. Maslow. I don't know if you're familiar with Maslow's work, but yeah, I think there's good work being done out there in that field. You know, that's very theosophical, and then if we can connect what Theosophy has to offer, maybe that's part of our work in the future. We need more theosophical psychologists, you know. Yeah, you know, we need to apply. We're going to go in this tomorrow, I think, in the World Cafe, right? You know, we got to, like Erwin said earlier, I think, the word is action. Was that you that we have to act?
Yeah.
So we're going to have that opportunity.
A lot of work to be done, all right. I saw Barend a while back already with a question. Is that correct?
Wow, I just want to start. I thought nobody had a question, so I... No, but I have a question. I just was wondering, can you grasp the essence of Blavatsky individually, or do you always need a group?
Do you always need a group?
Can you
to
grasp it as an individual, or do you need a group, a team, to grasp the message of Blavatsky?
Yeah. So we can, of course, ask, what is an individual? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's in that sense there is no, yeah, in that sense there is no individual in a sense also. I mean, there is actually only, as Jean pointed out, the darkness. We are all one. And so I think, and also if you, of course, reason from who Blavatsky was, like yourself explained, it is always something that goes from, one level to the other level. So, it's always the array of the sun behind which another sun shines, of which that sun is a ray. So in that sense, I think it's never possible to speak of an individual grasping. So yeah,
A part of a
that's-
part.
yeah, part of part, maybe. Yeah, Jim can explain. Yeah.
No, I was just to say that you're very right in saying so, but before the personality disappears, there must be a personal path to go through. That's because, and I think it's even HPB quoted many times, that we have to do the trip by ourselves. Then the question is, could we do it in group? Certainly better and faster. But at the end of the day, each one has his own characteristic, and he must find its own light inside his own heart before the personality disappears.
And I mean, I would just say, and this is more from H.P. Blavatsky, I think it's in the key, and she says, the odds that an individual by themselves walking on the path would walk it correctly are, I don't even know the numbers that she said, against 1. But now, the teaching also allows for many, many, many incarnations of study and initiation coming to fruition in one life. Because even in the Gita, Krishna says that those that are truly on that path encounter all of the knowledge that they had before and continue to move on from that point. That can happen individually. And sometimes that individual atmosphere is required in order to establish the balance that's necessary for that reminiscence, as HPB would say. So both are probably applicable, and truly, we have to have an ego before we can transcend an ego.
Well, you might say if we piggyback a bit on the metaphor she used yesterday, that the image, the ideal that was besmeared with the mud, that's the veil that the people made themselves between the ideal and themselves. So I guess the individual path is breaking down again the veils that you created with your own mud. And I guess you could compare it that way. Yeah.
Jos?
Thank you. Well, since the key message at this conference and with ITC is cross-pollination, I mean, this question really surprises me, Barend, because that's what the actual function of ITC is. And cross-pollination that means you need others. And since I'm not a biologist, I did some studies, some research to find out what exactly in biology cross-pollination is, and if there is anything else. And I found out that there is something like self-pollination. So that means you can grow, and I completely agree that growing is something you do individually, but I think you need others. But with plants, you can see this self-pollination. But I understand and there is a biologist in the room here, and hopefully he can confirm that. There are several of them. But I understand that nature's first automatic choice is cross-pollination. And self-pollination, at the end of the day, leads to degeneration, or weak results, or slow evolution, and things like that. So if you look at it from nature's point of view, we need cross-pollination, we need ITC, we need each other. And, okay.
Amen, yes. All right.
Yes, please.
I think on that note, Denson. Yes.
Then more time?
No, there's not, but we want to hear you anyway.
Jennings, showed us all that complex diagram. And, and one thing that struck me was ahankara. Ahankara, which is supposed to be a sense of separateness or I maker. Mm-hmm. And we speak all the time of I am this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm Joe. So how do you then, which I should we be identified with?
That's a good question to ask Gene.
Long story short, there is no I that we should identify with. The concept of ahankara is a state of energy that separates itself off from other and objectifies on that. And Madame Blavatsky speaks about that, which is an illusion. Because again, it's all occurring within the ocean of energy. But for practical purposes and for karmic purposes, that gets encased in the mud, and then we do the dance. And so in the Light on the Path, I think, or the Gates of Gold, it talks about untying the knot. And that knot is the idea of ahankara. But again, the danger in that, and it's a very real danger, when we begin to untie that knot, we begin to question the value of our existence as it was lived. And if we haven't made that transition, we become on the path of suicide. Because if we have not understood what that is about, and we are now devaluing ourselves, that's a danger. And so there is a tremendous amount of help and support that's required, perhaps that cross-pollination, to understand that process and the value that it has from the evolutionary perspective. We have to have a self so that we can begin to conceptualize in different ways, but we don't have to attach to the self, and we don't have to look for the fruits of the results of our actions in relation to a self. We take on the perspective of a center in practice that simply does what needs to be done in the most compassionate, loving way, and you wear the veil for others because they relate to you. But you don't identify with that veil as your being because you know better. That's it.
Let's give a hand to our speakers.
Thank you, guys.
As you might have noticed, behind you is an illusion called fresh coffee. We have a 15-minute